Greetings and welcome. My name is Ryan O'Rourke and I truly hope you find delight in today's demonstration. Now if you have any questions or inquiries regarding today's tutorial, I implore you to send me a message either on Facebook or leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now all of that being said, let's begin. We're going to begin today's tutorial by mentioning what not to do. And generally in both cartoons and children's books illustrations, you notice that clouds are generally in the shape of basic triangles, and they're made up of a myriad of equally shaped little spheres, as you can see here. Now this looks very unrealistic, and you never actually see clouds looking like this. However, we innately seem to be drawn towards drawing clouds in this way. So I'd like to begin by saying, don't do it this way. You want a lot more shape, you want a lot more movement, and you can really create something interesting and complicated if you avoid that general formula. So instead, I'd like us to look at a myriad of other shapes, such as squares and, again, circles and triangles, but using them in a very different way. So again, we're starting our cloud with a triangle, except this time I'm changing the size of each of the circle that is going to encompass it. Then I'm going to randomly add on a square and add, again, different shaped spheres and circles to it. The idea here is that we're creating a lot of inconsistencies, and these inconsistencies are what's going to make it much more interesting. So you can also add things like ovals in different sizes and shapes. You can add squares and a myriad of other things to the edge of these clouds. Here you'll notice that I added an entirely new triangle, and so now you're combining all of these shapes to create something new and interesting. So with all of that in mind, let's begin on our actual study today. So I'm going to begin by drawing two basic triangles and reshaping them to the size I want. I decided to put a third triangle in the middle, and then I'm erasing all of the inner lines and kind of cleaning it up. From there, I'm going to begin by creating a myriad of those circular shapes around these triangles. I'm softening them and I'm giving them a lot more movement. You notice in the top right hand corner I have it kind of fading off into the top and kind of wisping away. That's another technique you can add. But the whole idea here is that we're making it much more complicated. We're then going in and erasing all of the initial hard straight lines that we created. Once we have the general shape, we need to dictate where the light's coming from, and mine is coming from the top left-hand corner, which means everything on the far right is going to be darker. Also, things that are going to be under the cloud are going to be much darker as well. The cloud will also cast shadows upon other portions of the cloud, making those areas darker, meaning the middle of this cloud, because it has two high points, it's going to be very low. Now, there I was using a 6B pencil just to block in some dark areas. You can use any other, but I just wanted to use dark to save time. But of course that means you'll have to blend it out. So I just used a piece of tissue paper, wrapped it around a pencil until it was fairly dense, and then I used that to blend a lot of these areas. Now when I'm applying my pencil here, you can either do it in a linear fashion, as you can see, or you can move the pencil in a circular motion, which will create more of a smooth gradient, and honestly it will blend better. But when you incorporate the line work, you get more of a sense of movement. So really it's more of a choice of stylistic preference, but I wanted to incorporate both just so you could see the real difference. So on the left you have more of a spherical movement, and on the right you have more of a line work movement. So all of that in mind, we're still just creating more shapes, and we tried to create a lot of lighter areas in this cloud, but a lot of the extra detail is going to be done reductively, which means we're going to be taking out pigment and graphite. So we'll be using erasers for that. Right here we're just getting a general idea of the larger clusters of the clouds, and then later we'll plot in the smaller ones. So again, here I'm just softening everything, I'm blending it all together, and I'm making it fairly smooth. I'm also taking out all of the white areas, because a cloud generally isn't in the foreground, and so to have a pure white is to really bring out a contrast, and you don't always want that. So now that it's fairly dirty looking, I'm actually going in with a fairly sharp eraser and I'm erasing little areas of detail that I think I may want. I'm doing this in the same way that I'd be drawing. While I do this, I'm keeping in mind where the light is coming from, and so I'm creating a myriad of shapes where the left-hand side is much brighter, and the right-hand side, again, creates a gradient into darkness. Generally, it's going to be a lot of gradients. You're going to have a very light area, and then it's going to slowly blend into this darker pigment. You notice that I just cleaned up the piece of paper with a piece of tissue paper, by the way. You don't want to rub off all of the eraser shavings off of the piece of paper with your hand, because you can smear the pencil and the line work that you're working on and kind of mess up the movement. But if you're very light with a piece of tissue paper, you can solve that easily. So here again, I'm just going in and I'm adding in more detail with my eraser. I'm cleaning it up, and I'm kind of repeating this process of darkening areas and then softening them and then making things lighter yet again. So we're going in the cyclical nature in this cloud, and it's a lot of building layers and getting all of the details and the movements in the cloud just right. You'll notice that every time we do it, the darks will get a little bit darker, and that will get a little bit more detail within the cloud itself. We'll also start to further create those gradients, because if you look at the far left of this cloud, it's a very much black and white. But then as you get towards the middle, it's more of a gray and a dark gray, because that area is still partially covered with the shadow. Not completely, but enough to ensure that it's not going to be as bright as the far left side, even in the brighter areas, even in the brighter contours of the cloud itself. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, another thing you can do is add other clouds on top of it, like I'm doing here. This means we're just pulling something even more in the foreground, and we're layering it on top of what we've already done. So we're doing that with the exact same process that we were doing before. Because it's a little bit closer to us, you're probably going to want to incorporate slightly more contrast. You're going to make it minorly sharper as well. And this is all, of course, depending upon if it is your main subject or if it is just a part of the landscape. If it is part of the landscape and you have a main subject, you might want to soften it to an extent, and you can do that using the blender, aka the piece of tissue paper we've been using to soften the rest of the cloud. So now you'll notice that we're really creating a lot of interesting organic shapes through all of this darkening and lightening process. So at the front you have a myriad of almost a hilly aesthetic, where the light areas kind of move in bumps down to the bottom, and they are just clusters of different circular shapes, but also squares and a myriad of other things, where when you move to the right of it, you get more of this wistful movement where it goes back up into the sky, and it's more line work in the shape of a C, really. So from there, we have the top of our cloud, but of course, it's not going to be three-dimensional unless we incorporate the bottom. And so I'm doing this with a lot of line work. I'm keeping it in the general direction that I'm going to want it, and then I'm blending it out. Now this area definitely has to be as dark as the darkest area in the top of the cloud, or even darker, because it is not getting any sunlight. This is the epitome of contrast here at the bottom, and you need to keep that in mind. Now here I'm using my 6B, and I'm just doing a lot of cross-hatching to smooth out the shaded area, which means I'm doing lines left, I'm doing them right, I'm doing them diagonally in both directions, and what this is doing, it's creating a much softer blend. But while I'm doing this, you should note that I'm keeping it very light with the pencil. I'm not trying to dig into the paper, because again, I do want to blend it, and I'm doing a lot on top of it. So I'm going to have a lot to blend, and I don't have to worry too much about really digging it into the paper. And the less you dig the pencil into the paper, the more you can repair later with an eraser. So if you can be fairly subtle with your pencil and be very cognitive of how you're using it pressure-wise, you can go back much more.
So here I'm doing the same thing that I was doing in the top, where I will put down a layer, I will blend it out, I will erase portions of it to add a little bit of detail, and then I'll do the same thing over and over again. I'm also taking a little bit of that darker graphite at the bottom and I'm bringing it back up into the top of the cloud. I'm also going to create a couple other clouds in the background. They're going to be much smaller, and so they're going to have a lot less detail, and they might not even have any, as you can see there. It's kind of implied that they are in the background, that they are of detail, but because they're so much farther away, you just don't notice it. So that is our basic cloud tutorial. Again, you can go back, you can darken things, you can erase, but the whole idea here is that you're creating really weird organic shapes out of other geometric shapes, and you're just combining them, and you're working very reductively. You're putting down your pigment and then you're erasing it. So I truly hope this helped, and you continuously work through it as I've done. You can make it a lot darker here, you can see, and add a little bit more detail, change things up, and try to have a movement within it. You want the eye to be drawn from one part of the cloud back to another and then back to the front. You want it to be a cyclical thing. So I really hope this helped. And next week we will be covering a cloud, but how to paint it. So stick around for that, subscribe, and once it's finished I will include it in the description of this video as well.
Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you've enjoyed. And again, if you have any questions or inquiries regarding today's work or anything else you've been working on, please feel free to leave me a comment, send me a message, and you can actually send me your work on my Facebook page, where I'd be more than happy to provide for you a constructive, positive critique where we can just talk about art. It's a friendly, creative space, and I welcome you to join me there. Now, that being said, if you look in the description of this video, you will also find a link to my mailing list. And upon signing up for that, you can receive free real-time videos, extra tips, tricks, videos. There's a myriad of things to explore, and I hope to explore them with you. Now, all of that being said, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time out today, watching this with me, spending the time here, hitting that like button, that subscribe button, leaving a comment. Every little thing you do here, it matters immensely to me, and I just can't tell you how grateful I am. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.